Derek is not going to walk around. Shut up! Derek is not going to walk around, because if he does, he might suddenly become horizontal. That's not a very good idea. So I read recently that, to warm your audience up, you want to tell them a joke. So I tell you a joke. It's got nothing to do with linguistics at all. Just to make you cheerful. So one week, President Putin and Queen Elizabeth, ex-President Obama, they die. They all die in the same week. So they go to the pearly gates and they knock on the door, and there's St. Peter. And St. Peter says, come in. He said, you all get one phone call. And then, that's it. So Queen Elizabeth makes a phone call, 5 minutes, £25,000. Putin calls the Kremlin, 5 minutes, 3 million rubles. Obama gets 7 hours, it costs $5. Putin says, why is that? He said, Obama says that, since he left, everything went to hell, so it's just a local call. Is this a mistake, says Larry? Aspect and then tense is not a mistake. Aspect is primary, tense is secondary. One other thing, that we're supposed to be focused on Proto-Bantu, but one thing I've come to realize after talking to John Waters a lot is Proto-Bantu is just a stage along the journey. It's an arbitrary stage you have to be focused on. But what happened before that is just as interesting as what happened after that. Okay. So Mayerson worked backwards. I'm not going to move around at all. Mayerson worked backwards from a set of individual languages to PB. In better documented families, it doesn't work quite like that. You work from individual languages to individual protos. So you work from French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian to Proto-Romance, which is more or less Latin, or in Celtic you work, backwards to Proto-Celtic from Scottish Gaelic, Irish Gaelic, and so on. And then finally you work from Proto-European. So that's not possible, wasn't possible for Mayerson, it's not possible now, because Bantu languages are more numerous and less well known, and because few intermediate protos have been reconstructed as Bantu anyway. So I worked essentially as Mayerson from morphological data from a chosen set of languages. They're the 100 so-called database languages in my 2008 book, and that's the basis for all quantitative claims. One from each of Gothi's 84 groups, plus another 16 to make a nice round 100. They're the Appendix 1 languages at that website there. These are assumed to be typical of all of Bantu, but the percentages that you'll see coming up should be treated as approximate because they're based on descriptions that may or may not be complete, or they may be descriptions of a dialect which is not typical of the other dialects of the whole language. What Proto-Bantu might have had is not only based on working backwards from Bantu, what Bantu languages have today, but also from working forward to PB from what other Niger-Congo languages, especially Bantoid, have. They're examined in the next talk by John Waters. There are certain similarities between this paper and BGR1. Methodology conclusions are similar, not identical. There are also certain differences between this and BGR1. Well, that claim there, the size of the database, I know what the size of my database was. I've had some trouble finding out what the size of Mayersen's database was. There's consideration of considerable data in my paper from Niger-Congo. I distinguish tense from aspect, whereas Mayersen used tense as a cover term. And there's been an expansion of general knowledge, universal knowledge of tense and aspect since Mayersen. And in the Anglophone world, that means from Comrie onwards. In continental Europe, that means other things. BGR1 used tense as a cover term for several categories, mainly tense and aspect, which are separated here. There are several current definitions of tense and aspect. Sorry, aspect and tense. So I follow Comrie's as good as anybody else. So what's tense? The grammatical expression of location in time. Relates an event to a reference point in time, which is usually, not always, the present time of speech. Most European and some Bantu languages, like Swahili, have one pass. So if you need more precision, then you expand by a non-verbal item. We met him yesterday. Most Bantu languages have multiple pasts. Kikuyu, for example, has 3, so use of the middle past usually tells the listener that the event occurred yesterday. You don't need a non-verbal item. Aspect deals with how an event is distributed over time. So English has only one past tense, but then you see we lived here, implying we don't now. We have lived here, still do. We were living here when something else happened. We used to live here when we were young. They all refer to past. They're clearly different. The differences are factual. There exists a general impression that most, maybe all languages have tense. The opposite is more likely true. Most, maybe all languages have aspect, but they don't all have tense. Among linguists, there's a consensus that aspect is more fundamental than tense. Aspect emerges before tense in babies. Tense emerges from aspect. Tense systems emerge from aspect systems. Tense overlays aspect, etc. Some language families have only aspect and they manage very well. Chinese, Afro-Asiatic, Slavic, many pidgins, and so on. Some languages and language families develop tense on top of aspect, so Niger-Congo. Most Niger-Congo languages only have aspect. Proto-Niger-Congo was an aspect language that Proto-Bantu, some of its neighbours and a few other Niger-Congo languages added tense to their aspectual base. 90% or so, most Bantu languages have a structure something like this. That's a modified version of what's in BGR, a little bit different from what Tom had, but essentially says the same thing. Pre-subject marker, subject marker, post-subject marker, formative, limited, so on. Miss out the middle paragraph, we don't need that. Nearly all Bantu languages have the inflectional stem, root, extension, vowel. Also occurs widely in Niger-Congo and goes back, if not to Proto-Niger-Congo, then to early Niger-Congo. The final vowel component is where aspect is mainly marked in Bantu and widely in Niger-Congo. Innovatory aspectual marking has also occurred usually before the base at Meyerson's formative slot. My 2008 book examined the morphemes occurring commonly in Bantu at final vowel and estimated their percentage frequency on the basis of occurrence in the database languages. The figure coming up, the table coming up, the Bantu figures are more accurate than those for the rest of Niger-Congo, as the Niger-Congo data was less familiar to me. So if you look at what occurs at final vowel, what you see is this. Down the left-hand side, you see what I'm talking about, ag, let's just call it ag rather than ag-ang, ile, ite, vowel copy. The 4 at the end are separate for a reason that you'll see in a minute. So a is very common, e is very common, ag is somewhat less common. Of the 4 at the bottom, ile is very common in Bantu, the others are much less common. And if you look at Niger-Congo, I've just characterized it with one word. A is widespread, e is widespread, ag is not widespread. It's mainly, not only, Bantoid. And then of the 4 at the bottom, the only one which is really widespread in wider Niger-Congo is E. Ile is not widespread, Ite doesn't occur at all, and the vowel copy. Vowel copy, I mean something like Tulimi, Tuleme, Tulomo, Tulumu, and so on.
And Tulame.
Tulame. Good. 7 vowels. So A occurs in fact occurred in all Bantu languages. The missing 15% are almost all in the northwest, where final vowels have been lost. It's often interpreted as neutral, default, indicative, which is not really satisfactory. Outside Bantu in wider Niger-Congo, it plays a role in the basic aspectual contrast between perfective and imperfective, although no one-to-one connection with any one aspect is possible. This is a suffix, therefore, inherited by Proto-Bantu from the general Niger-Congo. Other than high tones, imperative, no generalizations can be made about the tone of A represents subjunctive and other derived categories such as future. As such, it's neither tense nor aspect, and is not further considered here. It's also inherited in Proto-Bantu from general Niger-Congo. Ag represents imperfective categories such as imperfective, habitual, iterative, durative, pluractional. Also occurs outside Narrow Bantu, most of Bantoid, and scattered outside Bantoid, so it's inherited in PD, PB, at least in Bantoid, but maybe not far beyond that. Too fast? Am I talking too fast? I can talk faster if you like. So, following, this is an interesting page, this. Following the 2008 book, I assume the other four final vowels in Table 1, ile, ite, and vowel copy, are all related and derivable from a single historical shape, because they have obviously similar shapes and meanings. They all involve a major or high front vowel, and they all refer to perfect. Perfect's not I decided perfect's a lousy label, because even people who work in it figure have trouble with perfect versus perfective. Retrospective is probably much better. Referring to retrospective, near past, or stative. Ite and the vowel copy variant are minor players. They're both infrequent. The vowel copy variant occurs mainly in southern Africa and the southern Swahili and Comoro Islands, a curious kind of distribution. Ite occurs mainly as an allomorph or replacement for ile, other than in A50, where it's developed an independent life, and it's in contrast to ile, for which it originally developed, probably. My thinking on ile and e has gone through 3 stages. The original stage, which was the stage that I represented in the 2008 book, is that the most common shape is ile in Bantu, and therefore that's what Proto-Bantu had. And then when I looked at Niger-Congo, at the second stage, I realized that e is very common in well, not very common in Niger-Congo, so I shifted to thinking that the original shape was, or the early Proto-Bantu shape, was E, out of which ile developed. But then a week and a half, or nearly 2 weeks ago, John Waters told me far too late to incorporate properly that things which look like ile exist quite widely in Bantoid, or parts of Bantoid. So I'm kind of in a fluid state at the moment. John and I have to talk about this further and see what the original project shape of Proto-Bantu probably was. Yeah, there's an interesting bit at the bottom there. The last 4 lines of that second. Within Bantu, ile and e have an interesting distribution. Most of the Bantu area, ile, which has no predominant tone pattern, is the predominant segmental shape of many allomorphs of which e, where it occurs, can be 1. But in some forest languages, I'm not sure how many. The opposite is true. The basic shape e occurs with most verb stem shapes, but ile occurs after short stems. So a summary of that is that Proto-Bantu inherited from Niger-Congo the inflectional stem, blah, blah, blah. The final vowel represents a spectral contrast, and in Proto-Bantu those contrasts were a, perfective, ag, imperfective, and ile, perfect, retrospective. That's similar, but not quite the same as what BGO1 has. These are the pre-stem markers. There are rather few of them, as you see. So these are tense markers, well, not all tense markers. These are markers which occur before the macro stem. 0, very widespread, almost universal in Bantu. A, very widespread. Ka, less so. Ki, even less so. And La comes as a big question mark. Rare, unusual. So A is wide. So if you just go back at the top line, 0 marker is very widespread. It co-occurs with final A and E and others widely in Niger-Congo. Widely. A, the same, widespread in Niger-Congo, but curiously not very widespread in grass fields. Ka, widespread in Niger-Congo, Ki, less so, but it occurs in Bantoid with meanings which relate very much to what occurs in Bantu, so progressive, imperfective, and so on. La, well, I put those forms in there just because they have that shape in Niger-Congo or in Bantoid. I'm not really convinced that they're connected. I just put them down there because they have the same kind of shape. They refer to all kinds of things, as you see. Arealis, potential, future. There are some which refer to past. So a discussion here. Pre-stem 0 occurs with all indicative final vowels in at least some languages in every Bantu zone, in 92% of the database languages. So schematically, A0, Kam, A0, Kam, Aga, and so on. It occurs overwhelmingly in non-past function. It expresses the vast present, general present, common, generic, progressive, participial form, narrative, consecutive, or it's the unmarked conjunctive member of the conjunctive disjunctive pair, often extended to represent future events. It occurs very widely in the same position and range of function across Niger-Congo, in forms where aspect is represented by various final vowels. So it's a Proto-Bantu form, probably inherited from Proto-Niger-Congo. It's the ultimate structurally unmarked form, which raises the question of tone. I am not going to deal with the second paragraph, because it'll take me out of my way, and Larry will get too excited and start shouting. Across Bantu, you might distinguish three kinds of A. One is the common one, the one at the top. Pre-stem morpheme A occurs with all final vowels in most database languages, all 16 zones, less often in the forest. It comes in many phonetic and phonological shapes: short A, long A, high A, low A, rising A. It occurs in compounds: A, li, A, ka, A, ku, A, na. So in one or other of these shapes, it occurs in nearly all the Bantu languages. It occurs overwhelming to past, general past, near past, mid past, far past, retrospective, consecutive, narrative. Consecutive and narratives most often, not only, but most often refer to past events. In some languages it occurs in only one function, in others it has several. Secondly, in many fewer languages it represents non-pasts, such as progressive, present, even future. These non-pasts often occur alongside pasts in the same language. In only 8 languages, overwhelming in the forest, does it only occur as a non-past. And then there's a third A, non-tense, non-aspect. Constituent focus, marked morphologically, occurs in most Bantu zones. It probably occurs in all. Some of the descriptions I was relying on are written in the early 20th century, and the notion of focus was not really important. Disjunctive focus, usually the marked category in a binary system, is indicated by limited, what Mayusen would have called limited morpheme following the formative tense marker, most often in both past and present reference. So for example, present 0 plus disjunctive A gives A. Past A plus disjunctive A gives long A. The limited data available suggests that this disjunctive is high-toned. Evidence for this disjunctive A comes not only from the few languages which have it as such today, but also from languages which have an A progressive or present. Compared with the many past A representing progressive, present, or similar categories are many fewer. It's attractive to try and derive some of these from disjunctive meeting. Tom, in several older works, established a connection between verb focus disjunctive and progressives, whereby verb focus forms may become progressive. Other scholars, so Heine and Kuteva, show progressives broadening to general presence. These often expand to non-past, even future reference. So you have a chain from A disjunctive to progressive to general present to non-past to future. I assume that Proto-Bantu had no non-past A, and that at least some, maybe all, maybe many, of today's non-past A originate in disjunctive A. Ka. Needs a little explanation here. The consonant K is lost in most of zone A, much of zone northern C, B20 and a little bit to D. So A in some of those zones might derive from A, but it also might derive from Ka. And the figure from Ka, in fact, might be slightly higher. Ka occurs in several functions. I ignore some of the functions, for example, negative. In line 4, that leaves you with 4 major functions, which account for the 74% itiv, andative, narrative, future, usually far future, and past, usually far past. Some of these overlap. All are widespread, and they occur in nearly all zones. Itiv, go and, 35% is the most frequent. Some of the labels in the descriptions I was reading are somewhat questionable. All occur from the forest languages down to southern Africa, so there's no real evidence for progressive shift of meaning, geographically or temporarily. It would seem to have been present for millennia. In nearly all languages which allow two or more themes between post-initial and infix, ka occurs second. That is, it provides evidence for Mausson's imitative slot. Where it so occurs, it occurs mainly after a in both past and future reference. In Nelson Phillips in 2006, we offered evidence for the hypothesis of a general connection between all four meanings deriving from the original meaning of itiv, location of an event away from the deictic center, away from the here and now, go and verb, physical relocation. Narratives involve a mainly temporal relocation of the deictic spot. She came, then she saw, then she conquered. Far past and far futures can be accounted for in a similar kind of way. The sequence formative liminative might have arisen from an original grammaticalization if only there was a verb that corresponds nicely to ka. I don't want to start speculating about that. There was a good bit of speculation yesterday about where certain extensions might have come from. A morpheme of the shape ka has some distribution in wider Niger Congo and Bantoid. Past, future, conditional, immediate future, all kinds of meanings. This disparate set hardly warrants any firm statement about the original meaning of ka in wider Niger Congo. All this suggests that reflexes of ka are widely spread enough across Bantu to warrant its assumption in Proto-Bantu either as itiv or in a derived set of meanings, maybe also in Bantoid. Reflexes of ki are much less frequent, and they mainly occur in savanna languages. They hardly occur in the forest, and when they do occur, many of the glosses which are given, already, eventually, future, are hard to reconcile to the meanings, apparent meanings that predominate in savanna languages. It's absent from some zones, for example H and most of F. The percentage includes two groups of languages which have forms arrival not just from ki, but from ki, high tone ki plus a. In savanna languages, this is various gloss as persistive, so be still doing something, situative or participial. If she goes, we saw her going. Persistive is the most common function, and in our 2006 article we discuss reasons why each, because it is the original meaning. Persistive, mainly high tone, is the majority form, widely distributed geographically and occurring in independent utterances. Participial or situative is a minority form, geographically limited, occurring mainly in a second aspectual member of compound verbs or in subordinate clauses. Persistive is time-bounded, participial is open-ended. Mayushin put ki and ka together in his limitative slot. However, examination of reflexes of ki in today's database languages show a different pattern from those of ka. Examination of reflexes of ki in the database languages, which allow both formative and limitative, show only 3 cases. Only 3 out of 100 showed a plus ki. They only occur in a very limited part of Zambia and Tanzania, and of those that do so occur, 3. Some might have a different explanation. For example, achi might be from the verb come. In contrast, well over a dozen or more sequences of aka occur, mainly in savanna languages from Lake Victoria down to Nyanza, down to South Africa. Within Bantoid, it occurs with relatable shape, ki, and relatable meanings. Because it occurs in Bantoid and in Savanna Bantu, I tentatively assume it for Proto-Bantu as a formative persistive, despite its infrequency in forest languages. Now, yes, the thing at the top comes in various shapes. La, ra, na, re, ro, and so on. Morphemes of this shape occur in only 22% of the languages I looked at. Most of them refer to future, and very few occur to other categories, which you can see there. In some languages, more than one of these so-called meanings occur. Most future forms appear to have a long vowel, but is adjunctive, and the present forms in the past are mainly short vowels, also predominantly low tone. Larry suggested to me that the apparently long voweled variants with which he is familiar in Lacustrine languages should be considered as bimorphemic. La, thank you. I'm getting there. La plus another vowel. Now this is true of other languages, and the basic shape might be la and not la. There have to be doubts about whether these form a coherent set. One doubt has to do with meaning. Tom has suggested that presents and progressive originate in disjunctives. This would then give two predominant meanings, future and disjunctive present, but it doesn't link these two, which also seem to differ in vowel length. And how do these other forms fit in? The second form has to do with interpreting the geographical distribution. Future and disjunctive present forms generally overlap geographically, occurring in a limited swathe of savanna languages from the eastern DRC to Lake Victoria down through western Tanzania and to Zambia. It's rather reminiscent of the distribution of key. This suggests that there are innovations in savanna. And what about then these two things here, which occur much further west but isolated, but in future meaning? In my 2008 book, I posited this as a future mark of Proto-Bantu. I think this is questionable, given its presence in only 17% of database languages. Well, keeping this in mind, what the last paragraph says is there are morphemes of this general shape in grass fields, but are they connected? There is other morpheme which has been grammaticalized in the pre-stem slot, and I list them there. It's easy to look at the table. In Narrowbantu, B plus ku, this is probably locative ku as opposed to infinitival ku, very widespread. I'm not quite sure how widespread they are in Niger Congo. The second one, forms of na plus ku, derived from with or have, occur in over 40%. They're fairly widespread also in wider Niger Congo. Nga, as coming from something practical meaning is as if like, over 30%, and ma is a weird distribution. It occurs on the east coast of Africa and the northwest, and it hardly occurs anywhere else. It doesn't occur very widely in Niger Congo. Down at the bottom, all of these have derived transparently from lexical sources via familiar grammaticalization paths. The source structures, the paths, the tense markers, likely existed at various times and places, not just during the several millennia since Proto-Bantu, but also back beyond Niger Congo, beyond Proto-Bantu in the Niger Congo. I don't reconstruct these for Proto-Bantu, although they may have existed at the Proto-Bantu period. Most likely candidate is B plus Ku. Besides these, there are many others, ba, be, bi, da, do, and so on. Others are transparently bimorphemic. You can see them in the last row there. So if you put all this together, the top half here is a summary of morphemes reconstructible for Proto-Bantu, individual morphemes, certain, less certain, and so on, different slots. And then down at the bottom, I organize those in a system. As you can see, it's a rather simple system. There's one past, there's one present on the left, and then across the top, there are aspects, perfective, persistive, iterative, imperfective, and retrospective, and so on. At this, the Twaguli that form on the top right here, was my second stage thinking about this, where I thought the Proto-Bantu form was E rather than Ile. The first paragraph there, the three common suffixes are those in table 1, for which the labels perfective, imperfective, and perfect are used. I assume those are Proto-Bantu. Perfective represents the situation as a single whole, without distinction. We lived there for 20 years. it's represented as a single event. Imperfective pays attention to the internal structure of the situation and implies a contrast with perfective, and retrospective denotes a situation started in the past and continues into the present. Maybe I'll ignore the second paragraph. The key and ka both can be assumed because they're so widespread. The third paragraph, it's likely that in Niger-Congo outside Bantu, perfective and imperfective were originally associated with single final vowels, and predominantly E and A. Final vowels were lost in a huge area in West Africa, so evidence of these final vowels and their functions is widely obscured. Their functions came then to be represented in new ways, by floating tone, or new suffixes, or new pre-stem morphemes. Few Niger-Congo groups keep something like the original vowels, E and A. Dogon, for example, Kordofanian, Zande. Those familiar with universals of aspect might be surprised by the strange configurations in the table you've just seen. Universal theories, for example, tend to highlight a binary contrast between perfective and imperfective. I'm very well aware of those universals, but my primary aim was not to base Proto-Bantu on universals, but to reconstruct from the Bantu data. Did PB have a future? Well, I've been into that already. Questionable, because La is a very limited distribution. How many were there? Let's just take the second paragraph. How many past can be reconstructed for Proto-Bantu? BGL1 has a recent past low-toned and high-toned, preterite, far past. But Mayusen adds that these are guesses rather than real reconstructions, because conjugation in Bantu is, quote, unstable. On the other hand, Nelson Phillips in 2006 say, well, he would be reluctant to say that more than one past with different tonal profiles and meanings can be reconstructed at the level of PB. And the reasons for this reluctance are not really too well spelled out. There's no principal way of resolving this disagreement, especially with such a short morpheme consisting of one vowel. There's a myriad of phonological, semantic, and categorical variation, combinatory possibilities. Are they related? 30%, over 30% of the database languages have contrastive pre-stem a representing past. The differences involve tone and vowel length are the most often accompanied by other differences in final vowel, for example. It's rare, only 13% of the languages, for a tonal contrast alone to represent two a, which argues against Mayusen's assumption of two tonally distinct past a in Proto-Bantu. So where do these contrastive a come from? Well, I'm not a tonologist, as everybody knows, so when I was working towards the 2008 book, I turned to Gerard, and we produced this 2006 article, and we suggest a number of routes whereby phonologically long a could derive from short a. There might also be tonal routes by which one a could produce tonally contrastive a. Larry, for example, mentions that some E20 languages have a high tone which gets thrown under the next syllable. Once phonologically contrastive a's were available, they would provide the structures for the development of semantically contrastive past a, which is characterized as the evolution of Bantu over millennia. While this might be a plausible general explanation, it doesn't tell us at what point these developments might have taken place. The first paragraph says that I think most of the non-past are not reconstructable. I think they come from probably disjunctive a. How to reconstruct pre-stem a in Niger-Congo, second paragraph. Outside Niger-Bantu, outside Bantu, there are quite a lot in wider Niger-Congo. There are very few in grass fields. So I think that while acknowledging that such a exists across Niger-Congo at a pre-Bantu stage and might have led into Proto-Bantu a, it would be prudent at this point to exclude them in any reconstruction of Proto-Bantu. Mayusen, in the final paragraph, suggested a disjunctive ra. There are very few disjunctive ra in the database I was using. There are many more a. that would involve deletion of R and L, for which there's currently little coherent data. Ki and Ka, well, I've said this already, although the distribution of Ki and Ka is somewhat anomalous, it exists, not only exists in Savannah languages or Eastern Bantu, it exists widely outside, fairly widely outside, so I assume both of those for Proto-Bantu. Okay, that's the end, but it's not the end. There's 2 minutes. There are 4 more here. I'll just read the bolded parts. John won't like this because it's what he's going to say. So if you just look at the bolded part, tense is a systematically marked category. This is a quotation from him. In Bantoid, emerged east of the Cameroon volcanic line, in the high plateaus and slopes of the low riverine regions around the Mbam River in the Sanaga River Basin, which is primarily the region of eastern grass fields and the Mbam languages. The volcanic line serves as the boundary between aspect prominent to the west and tense aspect languages to the east. And then possibly the original impulse to developing tense came from the region where Proto-Grass fields and Proto-Bantu emerged. So grammaticalized tense became an aerial feature that then spread to Tika, Beboid and Mamonoid along the eastern slopes and plateaus of the Cameroon volcanic line. So the innovation of tense began before the Bantu migrations began. Tense did not originate specifically in Proto-Bantu, it originated its feature of that area. Now at the bottom, you like the line down at the bottom, why was tense innovated in science? The why question is important. I don't know why the tense emerged. Here, earlier I said that most verbs, most Bantu languages derive from an agglutinating structure. What about the other 10%, Tom will say. So the bolded part there, many or most Niger-Congo languages today have an inflectional stem but no prefixation. That is, they're analytic, while acknowledging there are pockets where agglutination has occurred. As we move east across Niger-Congo, we come to the Bantu languages, Tika, Beboid, Mambonoid, etc. In contrast to most agglutinating narrow Bantu, these have an analytic structure. So agglutination in Bantu must be recent, postdating the split from other Bantu languages. Here I looked at verb structure in Zone A. So in about half the languages in Zone A, in the sample I looked at, appear to be prefixing synthetic agglutinating. At the other end of the spectrum, there are languages which have the inflectional stem preceded by a string of independent pronouns, adverbs, particles, clitics. Between the two ends of the spectrum are languages which join some of the morphemes preceding the inflectional stem. So A83 and 84 have just SM and TM, followed by a string of other independent morphemes, and then the inflectional stem, whereby E46 conjoins all the morphemes preceding the inflectional stem, but keeps that string separate from the inflectional stem, as you see there. And then finally, just the middle paragraph there. Those Bantu languages with the synthetic structure, mostly in zones B and S, plus some in A, can be derived from a synthetic structure in late Proto-Bantu. A few languages in zone A derived from an earlier stage in Proto-Bantu, well, the verb is analytic. So my solution to this question of analytic versus synthetic is that early Proto-Bantu was analytic and then developed into two groups, split into two, one of which remained conservatively analytic and the other innovatingly synthetic. Thank you.
Okay, so please hold on to your questions. As Derek promised me, we would take considerable time from John's presentation, and he kept his promise. So we will first gonna listen to John Waters before we go into the discussion section. I don't know if you want to sit down or walk around. Okay, so the floor is yours. Thank you. So,